Hey math enthusiast, I'm here to go over some notes on writing and graphing equations of circles. Now before we get started with circles, I just want to review what we do know as far as writing equations and graphing them for lines. So if you remember, the first thing we know for lines is that when we write an equation, it's typically in the form y equals mx plus b. Now there's two pieces of information that are given there. M and B, my slope and my y-intercept. So we have our y-intercept down here, and then our slope is just going to be our rise over run. So we're just selecting 2 points that we can focus on in my line and figure out how far up and over it goes. So those two things determine where my line is on the graph and how steep it is. So let's keep that in mind as we go through these notes. So for the equation of a circle, similar to the equation of a line, I need to know where to start. What's my y-intercept? But for a circle, in other words, I need to know where's my center. All right, so the coordinates we use for the center are going to be h and k for my x and y coordinate for my center. The other thing I need to know is how big is my circle? All right, I need to know what the radius is. All right, the center and the radius will tell me where my circle is located on the graph. All right, and obviously the radius is here in my equation. All right, so this should look familiar because it's almost as if we have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So it's essentially the Pythagorean theorem written again, but to represent the equation of a circle. All right, and the reason for that is because we essentially can sketch out a small right triangle here in this picture on my circle. So for this first example, now I'm asked to write the equation of the circle that's given. So I need to identify two things. First, I need to figure out where is the center in my circle. So it looks like it's going to be this point right here, which is located at -3, +2. The other thing I need to know is what's my radius? How big is the circle? I'm essentially just going from the center to any point on the edge of my circle. All right, it looks like in this case my radius is 2. So once you have the center and the radius, you can write your equation. Now remember, your center, your x-coordinate is h and your y-coordinate is k. So now I'm plugging all this into my equation. So it's going to be x minus h, so minus -3 squared plus y minus k, which is +2, equals r squared. So in this case, 2 squared. And now I'm just going to clean this up because negative is going to give me x plus 3 squared. And then the other side I have y minus 2 squared. And my radius squared is obviously going to be 4. So for this next problem, same deal. Locate your center and your radius to write your equation for your circle. So it looks like in this case my center, now they're going by 2's, so my center is +2, +2, and my radius in this case, since we're going by 2's, is actually going to be 4. So we'll fill everything into my equation. Remember, this is your h, this is your k, so it's going to be x minus h, which is 2 squared, plus y minus k, which is 2 squared, and then equals my radius squared, which is 16. So for the next couple problems, it's the same situation. I want to write out my equation, my circle, but now I really don't have to find anything because they give me my center and they give me my radius. Just remember that this is your h and then this is your k to plug into your equation. So it's going to be x minus h, which is really 0 squared, and y minus k, which is -5, so that's going to turn into +5 squared equals my radius squared, which is just going to be 9. Now, if you want to, we can clean this up a little bit because I know that x minus 0 is really just x, so what I can fill in there is just x squared instead. So for the next problem, same situation. Identify your h and your k. It looks like in this case it's going to be x plus 3 squared, y minus 5 squared, and then it's going to equal 49. Oh, 49. Oh, there we go, 49. Now, for this next problem, they do give me my center. I know it's 2, 6, so there's my h and my k, but I don't have my radius directly. All the other information they give me is a point that's on the circle. All right, well, you have to remember that the distance from the center to any point on the circle is your radius. So what I need to do is figure out the distance between this point and this point. And how I'm going to do that is the distance formula. So we're going to do x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So that's going to leave me with 3 squared, 4 squared. Move it up here, so I'm going to end up with 9 and 16, which gives me 25, which is 5. So now I know that my radius is going to be 5. Now at this point you can write out your equation. So I remember it's x minus h, which is 2 squared, y minus k, which is 6 squared, and then my radius squared, which is going to be 25. So for the next problem, it looks like it's the same setup. They give me my center, which is at 1724. That's my h and k. And they give me a point that's on the circle. So once again, I need the distance from the center to this point on my circle to figure out what my radius is. So I have to rely on the distance formula again. So we'll do x2 minus x1 squared, y2 minus y1 squared. So it looks like we end up with 20 squared, 15 squared. Move this up here, which is going to give me 400 plus 225. Gives me 625, which tells me that my radius is going to be 25. So now you can start filling in your equation. So I have my h and my k, so I know it's going to be x minus 17 squared plus y minus 24 squared equals my radius squared, 25 squared, which is 625. Now, for the next problem, I'm given endpoints of my diameter. Okay, so -1, 3, and 7, -5. So in this case, I don't have my center or my radius. Well, you got to remember that the endpoints of your diameter, so the diameter cuts all the way across my circle, the center of that diameter is going to be the center of my circle. All right, so I have to use that to find my center. So how do I get the point that's directly in the middle of these two endpoints? Well, in this case, I'm going to have to use midpoint formula. So if you remember what that was, essentially what we're doing is the average of the x's, so -1 and 7, divided by 2, and the average of the y's, 3 plus -5, divided by 2. So it looks like my midpoint going to be at 6 over 2, -2 over 2, which is going to lead me to 3, -1. So now I have the center of my circle, 3, -1. Okay, so now I have the center of my circle. What I really need after this is just the radius to write out my equation. Okay. Well, just like the last problems, to find the radius, I need the distance from the center to any point on the circle. Okay, so it doesn't matter which one you choose because I have 2 to go with. Let's go with -1, +3. So once again, I'm going to use the distance formula. I'm going to do my x2 minus x1 case 3 minus negative 1, y2, negative 1 minus 3 squared. So it looks like when I simplify that, we end up with 4 squared, negative 4 squared. So it's going to be positive 16 and positive 16, which is going to give me radical 32. And then I can actually break that down into 4 radical 2, because it would be 16 and 2. Okay, so now I have my radius. I know that it's 4 radical 2, and I'm just going to keep it just like this, and you'll see why in a second. So now I can write out my equation. So remember, for your center, this is your h, this is your k, so it's going to be x minus 3 squared, y minus k, which is negative 1, so it's going to turn into positive, equals your radius squared. So technically it's going to be 4 radical 2 squared. Well, remember where that came from. My radius is really radical 32. And as soon as I square that, that's just going to become 32. For the next couple problems, now it's your job to graph the circle based on the equation that's given. So if I'm going to graph my circle, I need 2 things. I need my center and I need my radius. All right, so remember your center is your hk. Well, in this case, there is no k to go along with y. So that tells me right away that my k, my y coordinate, is going to be 0. All right, my h is going to be positive 1. All right, because remember your standard form is really x minus h squared and y minus k squared. And it's equal to the radius squared. Well, in this case, my r squared is 4, so that tells me that my radius is actually 2. Now you have all the information you need to graph your circle. So I know my center is at 1, 0, and I know my radius is 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 2 units out from the center of my circle. Now all I need to do is essentially draw a circle connecting all these points together. Try to make it as neat as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, as long as you have your center marked and points showing that my radius is going to be 2. So for the next problem, it's the same setup. What I need to do is graph this equation right here. So I'm going to need my center and I'm going to need my radius. All right, so remember what your standard form is to pull out your h and your k. So in this case, my h is going to be positive 4, but because this is plus right here, I know my k is going to be negative 1. And this is my radius squared, which tells me my radius is actually 4. Now you have all the information you need. So you know your center is going to be at 4, negative 1. And you know your radius is going to be 4. So I'm going to go 4 units to the right. I'm going to go 4 units down, 4 units to the left, and 4 units up. Now you essentially have a rough sketch of what your circle is going to look like. So now I can kind of sketch out my circle. It's obviously centered around my center point and it touches all of those points. Hopefully your circle is a little bit neater. Now for this next problem, there's 2 different things I have to graph. I have to graph this circle and I have to graph this line, and then I want to determine, is it tangent or is it a secant? So first let's focus on my circle. So if I'm going to graph that, I'm going to need a center. So I got to find my h, I got to find my k, and obviously I'm going to need my radius. Remember, this is your radius squared. So my h is obviously 4, but my k, once again, because this is plus, is going to be negative 2. My radius squared is 16, which tells me that my radius is 4. As far as graphing this line goes, remember what I said in the beginning of the video, you're going to need your slope and you're going to need your y-intercept. It looks like in this case my slope is actually positive 1 and my y-intercept is negative 2. So let's jump over to the graph and see what this is going to look like. So first I'll start off with my circle, my center, which is located at 4, -2. And my radius in this case is 4. So I'm going to go 4 units out from my center, 4 units up, 4 units to the right, 4 units down, and 4 units to the left. So I'll try to sketch out my circle as best I can in this case. An arc going around, touching all those points. And then let's focus on my line here. So I know it's going to go through -2 in the y-axis, and I know my slope is 1. So from here I'm going to go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. It looks like this is going to be that line. So in this case, it clearly intersects my circle at 2 different points. So from there, I know that it must be a secant. So for these last couple problems, what I need to do is locate the center and the radius of this circle. All right, well, the problem is the equation that they give me is not in that standard form that we're accustomed to seeing, that x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So this is what I'm given. If I'm ever going to locate the center and the radius, what I need to do is rewrite this into this form, this standard form. So let's figure out how I can do that. First thing I'm going to start off with is just rearranging my equation. So we got x's, we got x squared and 10x. I'm going to put those two together. We got our y's, so y squared and 8y. I'm going to put those two together. Y squared and 8y. And I'm actually going to take this 23 and I'm going to move that to the other side of the equation. So over here I have positive 23. So the thing is, I want it into this form. I want x minus or plus something squared and y minus or plus something squared. What I'm going to need to do is put a third term in here. All right, what this technique is called, and you probably remember it from last year, is completing the square. All right, that's what I'm going to do in both of these cases. So I got to figure out what term do I want to put in here to complete the square, and what term do I want to put in here to complete the square. Now, I want to choose a specific term so that I can break these down and essentially factor them into square binomials. All right, so I don't want to just choose anything at random. If you remember what the rule of thumb is you take this term, my -10, you're going to divide it by 2, which is going to give me -5, and then you're going to square that. That will tell me what term is going to be plugged in here. So this should really be plus 25. So for my next case with the y, I'm going to take that term, that 8, divide it by 2, and square it, which is going to give me positive 16 here. Now, the whole purpose of adding in that 25 was that I could factor this. All right, so now I can break this down into x minus 5 and x minus 5. In other words, it's just going to be x minus 5 squared. And in the other case, we have y squared plus 8y plus 16. It's going to be y plus 4 and y plus 4, or y plus 4 squared. Now, because I added 25 and I added 16 into my equation, I'm going to have to do that to the other side as well. So I'm going to have to add 16 here, and I'm going to have to add 25, which is going to give me 64. Finally, I have my equation in that standard form. Now, what they were actually asking for was the center and the radius of my circle. So remember, this is your h, this is your k. So my center is going to be at positive 5, negative 4, and my radius is, this is my radius squared, my radius is going to be 8. So this is actually your final answer. So for the next problem, I want to start off the same way. I just want to rearrange my equation. So we're going to have x squared and 2x together. I'm going to leave a little space here to complete the square. And then we're going to have y squared, which is just going to be by itself. There's no other y term. All right, so that tells me right away that for my center, the y coordinate is actually going to be 0 here. And then as I said before, on the other side, I'm going to take that 35 and I'm just going to add it to the right. So I really only have to complete the square for my x term. So I know I'm eventually going to factor this. I got to figure out what term's going to go there. So if you remember, what you do is you take that b term, that positive 2, I'm going to divide it by 2, and I'm going to square it. Well, that's just going to give me 1 squared, and 1 squared is just going to be positive 1. So now when I factor this, it's going to be x plus 1 and x plus 1, which gives me x plus 1 squared. So that means on the right-hand side, now I'm going to have to add 1, since I added it right here. So over here, I'm going to have 36. Now it's written out in my standard form. So now I can pick out my center. We already determined that the y coordinate was going to be 0, but now I know my x coordinate is negative 1. And my radius is really going to be 6, because remember, this is your radius squared.